like we've said before, we act as
a pipe,
kind of a conduit outside the neighborhood. So, and this is what we've done. We've created this meeting here.
And we're obviously not politicians, and we're not lawyers, and we don't really understand the process of and the nuances of the politics involved here. But obviously there's something going on. We wrote to the council members and to the mayor's office. This is Deputy Mayor Daryl Smith. To ask them to come speak with us about the concerns that we heard at the last meeting. And to express to them that Highland Park is happy to help the homeless. And we're interested in sharing the burden of homelessness with the rest of Seattle and all the other neighborhoods in Seattle as well. And we propose that it would be, if Nickelsville if the encampment can move around to different neighborhoods every, I don't know what time frame makes sense, every 6 months out there, just because that's how long but
it could be a year. It's the idea is that it's an idea in someone's mind that it's a finite amount of time for a specific neighborhood.
And every neighborhood in Seattle should be responsible for helping the homeless. And that maybe it's a lottery system, you draw a name out of a hat, that kind of thing. And Magnolia has a time, every neighborhood has a chance. So we also said in our letter that we felt that at the time, we've been corrected, but at the time we thought that there was a goal to make 450 to 1,000 people living down there, and that that is not true. I guess that the site right now can only hold 350 people max. But either way, we feel that is too many people to have on a site that doesn't have water, power, sewer, or adequate access to supplies. In proposing that the Nickelsville encampment move around, it should be an adequate site for the homeless, with basic public health, safety, and welfare being a priority. The same rules apply to the city that apply to a landlord, I would think. And if the city is saying that people can live on their property, then they need to be able to supply that tenant basically with the basic health, safety, and welfare items like heat and water, sewer, and power. And then the other thing that we proposed is that the intake for Nickelsville be centrally located downtown or somewhere. I don't know where it makes sense, but we heard a lot of concerns about people that aren't being accepted into Nickelsville, which runs a really tight ship. So I imagine there's a few people that get rejected because the rules are pretty strict to get into Nickelsville. So where do those people go? I mean, people are concerned about them coming to the neighborhood. There's been an increase of homeless people in the Greenbelt. So we thought maybe an idea would be to have the intake be not at the site, or maybe there's several different Nickelsville sites throughout the
We're
city.
not necessarily tying an increase of people in the Greenbelt to Nickelsville, but it's just
concern.
Well, it's just a fact, and we're just presenting facts.
Yeah.
So we're not saying that Nickelsville has caused that.
We don't. Nobody knows. So
is there anybody in charge of policing the Greenbelt?
There are. It's hard.
From the city?
I spoke with the police today and the fire station as well, and it's a hard population to monitor and keep, understand. So there are estimates of how many people are living in the Greenbelt. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, are people removed from the Greenbelt?
Yes. There are people that are removed from the Greenbelt. I'm not sure that happens on a regular basis, and I'm not sure why and how that happens. And unfortunately, our community policeman couldn't get tonight.
Just for the record, I'm pro Nickelsville, but I'm not pro people living in the Greenbelt. So let's clean them out, right? Would be my question and my idea, and not have Nickelsville suffer because of what the people are being rejected or doing. That doesn't seem too fair.
It doesn't.
Yeah, we agree with that.
So with that behind us, I don't know if you guys had a chance to check this out, but a lot of these are facts that we know about Nickelsville, mostly supplied by Nickelsville in the response letter, clearing up some of the things that I got wrong in my letter to the city. Basic rules, nobody's allowed to eat there if they're not a member there or not a resident there. So Nickelsville is not supplying people with services that are living in the Greenbelt, just to get that clear. I mean, I think that's a big concern that people are having. And then we'll refer back to these facts as they come up if we need to clarify anything that comes up. But I would like to give the Deputy Mayor and Councilman Susan a chance to respond to some of the concerns that we've expressed. And you're Lisa from Nickelsville's office, who's the chair of the committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the letter and for inviting me. I appreciate it. And also, just to point out, this is Jerry Greek from the Mayor's office as well, who works a lot on homelessness issues, human services, financial empowerment. And I believe we have someone from the Department of Neighborhoods here you all know very well, I hope.
Some.
Very good. Well, again, thank you. My name is Darrell Smith. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Community for the City of Seattle in the Executive's office. And I first want to say thank you for your letter. We did receive it, and we put a lot of thought into a response, so much so that I thought it would be best for me to come out and meet with you this evening, so I appreciate the invitation. I'm going to sit, that's okay. If you can't hear me, let me know and I'll try to speak up. And I apologize about being a few minutes late this evening. It's just been an event making my way up the hill. I was hoping that I could speak with you about a few different issues and provide a little bit of context as well. Needless to say, this is a complicated issue, the issue of homelessness, and certainly I think we're all reminded these days with this economy that it's more challenging for more families and more individuals across the nation, and not just here in Seattle, facing the issue of homelessness. Many people are a check or two away from losing their apartment. Many people are experiencing homelessness that probably thought they would never ever face this sort of situation. So the City of Seattle has not been immune to this, and we've certainly seen more challenges than I believe we ever have in this particular arena. Not just because I happen to be working in the Mayor's office now, and I happen to work very closely with the Human Services Department, and this is one of the issues that I work on, but we've certainly seen not just homelessness writ large, but different kinds and different reasons for people falling into this situation. So I say that just to say that we're facing a big challenge, and with news of the state budget, obviously, and some of the cuts that we feel will likely be coming at us, you know, it puts even more pressure on the city. We're looking at some really drastic challenges. Now, last year, Mayor McGinn in his budget was able to, and we're very pleased about this, the council adopted it as such, keep our human services budget about where it was for 2011, which is great news. During the last year, we also experienced a severe cut from the federal government on our block granting. Block granting funds that actually go directly into shelter services. It was a large amount of money, and the mayor decided, I thought made a very brave decision and the right decision, which was to backfill all of those block grant cuts so that we could keep the level of services associated with shelters the same. Now, if we experience another cut from the federal government and what we glean is coming at us from the state budget, to be able to do that again will be extremely challenging for us because, of course, the city's budget is strained, as many of you in this room have read and know. So we're facing some really big challenges. And so the issue of homelessness, obviously, is very front and center for us. So just to go back a little bit, I'll take a few questions as well, but I wanted to go back, if you'll allow me to tell you about what's transpired over the last year. Mayor McGinn asked me to put together a panel, essentially, on the issue of encampment because, frankly, the administration that preceded us had a different relationship to the community called Nickelsville and other encampments that had been in and around the city of Seattle. And that relationship, in our view, the way it ended up certainly with folks ending up on electeds, parking strips in front lawns to demonstrate to the administration that there's challenges out here, and we feel that at least having a relationship where we're talking should be where we start. The mayor asked me to put together the encampment panel to look at these issues, not just Nickelsville, but just homelessness in general. Where are there gaps in our system? Our new director of the Human Services Department, Danette Smith, has a lot of experience in this area, and coming out in April will be a new shelter request, a new shelter RFI, a new way of sort of saying to all of our providers and working with them up to the release of that RFI, where are there gaps in our system? And frankly, we do have some gaps. Councilmember Rasmussen is here, who has a lot of expertise in this area. I'm sure would agree that when we look at our shelter system, we do see some gaps. Other jurisdictions in the nation, it doesn't quite look the same as in Seattle. We know for a fact, and I've got some stuff here, the availability and options for families experiencing homelessness aren't that great in Seattle. We actually don't have a lot of options for them in the shelter system. So that's an area where we need to do a little better. We need to look at a couple of new ideas adding into what I call, probably incorrectly, but I'll say it here, which is our sort of shelter delivery system. What type of system do we have? So we know we have a gap in family shelters. We also know that we want to take a look at the idea of having shelters that operated 24 hours. Most of our shelters right now, you come in at a certain hour, and then in the morning you're basically put back out on the street, and that shelter is closed for those hours doing whatever they're doing. We want to look at the idea of what it might be to have an enhanced shelter, a shelter that operates 24 hours, a shelter that's connected to other services. So in that spirit, leading up to that RFI, we did a couple of things at the behest of the encampment panel, which is to say, Mayor McGinn took their advice, and the council read their report as well, to say that the idea of having a city-sanctioned encampment, in our belief, connected to services, thinking of it as almost like a soft landing. If you are experiencing homelessness because you were one of those families that was a paycheck away, and you ended up out on the street because you could not pay your rent, could we create a place that would be a soft landing, perhaps connected to services, so we could get you back on the path to not experiencing homelessness? You have examples like this, enhanced shelters. For example, I'm going to tell you about one that's opened very recently in the Lake City neighborhood that I work very closely with Councilmember Licata's office on. We opened in Old Fire Station 39 in Lake City a temporary over-the-winter shelter. It's run by the Union Gospel Mission, and during the day they have what are called day services there. So if you need information about how to get back into an apartment, legal help, dental help, any of these sort of referrals, they can provide those referrals. So in our mind, creating a shelter that has those sorts of services, and at the behest again of the encampment panel, to create the type of encampment that, in our mind, connected to services that could actually help people get out of homelessness, was something worthwhile to pursue. We put together a proposal, and it would have taken some dollars. And the way, of course, it works in our government is the mayor or the council can propose. When it comes to dollars, it's at the council's behest whether those dollars are spent. Okay? The mayor proposes a budget, and the council adopts the budget, and they often will make a few changes. So we put down a marker saying we thought we could try to, wouldn't be perfect, granted, but we wanted to try something, which was to create a city-sanctioned encampment with services connected to it in the Soto neighborhood. The council did not agree with the executive on that and decided that rather than spend the money there, they wanted to look at a series of different options. Meanwhile, last winter, because of where the Nickelsville community was staying, which was up in the University District, their period of time of staying, being welcomed by the Congregational Church there, was running out. And they were running up against the deadline of moving yet again. And if you ask anybody from the Nickelsville community, they'll tell you they've moved a lot of times over the last 3 or 4 years. That's kind of the way it worked. You had a couple of different organizations that were signed on to something called a consent decree that put out some rules about where you could locate and for how long. The Nickelsville community was not part of that agreement, so therefore they moved a lot of different places. When they had to leave the University District, the mayor instructed me to essentially invite them in when we had the really bad winter weather coming to stay in the old firehouse over those winter months. Okay? So they would have an indoor location during the worst of the winter. As you remember, it was really, really bad last winter with wind and hail and all of that stuff. On their own, the Nickelsville community decided at a certain point to leave the firehouse, although we certainly made them it known that they could stay longer if they wished. We've since repurposed the firehouse just for overwinter, and we have to figure out down the road what to do with that property. Likely it'll be some sort of affordable housing with some services in the main floor that can benefit homeless families or some version of that. So Nickelsville moves and they come to down here along Marginal Way. Last summer, got the letter here, I think it's dated, I forget what the date is here, but I put together a letter that essentially talked about the fact that the mayor did attempt to do this city-sanctioned encampment in the Soto area. We essentially did not get the go-ahead from council in terms of spending the dollars to do it, so that project was essentially pushed back, and the council wanted to examine a number of different options. Meanwhile, the Nickelsville community lands where they land, and down on Marginal Way. So we're in this odd period right now where the question for me really becomes, do we go back to what a prior administration did, which is, if you're not part of the consent decree that I mentioned that details rules, who's involved, where you can go and for how long, what do we do about encampments, not just the Nickelsville communities, but others? There are others in greenbelts, some large, some small. What do we do about these encampments that are out there? It's a reality that they exist. And I believe that, past administration, the idea of not speaking to them or, chasing them around to the next location probably isn't particularly constructive. So where does that leave us today? It leaves us in a rather challenging spot, which is, there's no legal pathway for them to be on the SDOT property in Marginal Way right now. Land use would have to be changed. We would actually have to create a new terminology within the land use code for that to be a legal place for them to be. So, meanwhile, I have to ask myself, is it the best thing to do, particularly with the backdrop I described to you about funding at the state and federal level, the challenges we're facing, to have them, again, be sort of moving around a lot of different places and chase them to another location when they'll probably end up moving again, when we know that we have more of this as an issue in the community in general. So here they are. One possible pathway, and the council will look at this year, I believe it's coming out of Councilmember Licata's office, I'm sure it is, which is to look at, again, how do we look at our land use code and have the conversation finally, because it's long overdue, to see if a city-sanctioned encampment can happen because we actually do it the right way, which is to create a legal pathway for that to happen. Now, if that happens, and this is still a very big if, what would that require? Would there be the sort of life safety protections in there? Would services be connected to it? All of the sorts of things that we were actually trying to do in the Soto neighborhood, because that detailed all of those. So if the council moves to have that discussion through the comprehensive plan update, then as a community we can have those conversations and decide what should be required if this is to exist. So that's going to happen, I believe, this spring, where the conversation can finally happen. In the interim, we have the Nickelsville community there. I read the West Seattle blog pretty religiously. I know it's been covered widely. I know that occasionally a family has come there. And certainly when I think about our current shelter delivery system, when we don't have a lot of choices for families, it's not surprising. It doesn't give us great comfort because obviously we don't want kids to be out in tents in the cold. It's not the very best place for them. So the shelter RFI that I mentioned earlier that will come out this spring in April, it's our hope that we can start to begin to address a really difficult challenge, which is taking an honest look at our shelter delivery system, continue to invest in the 10-year plan to end homelessness, which is really focused on delivering numbers of units, because ultimately we want a place for everyone. But the reality right now, and I've said this many times on TV, is that encampments do exist in the city of Seattle. I can tell you about one that's right on an entryway to I-5 at 7th and Cherry, which is not a safe place. And we really want to make sure that people are out of harm's way. So we have all sorts of challenges like this. But basically, the shelter RFI, we hope will start to begin to address some of those issues when we can look at the system and find out what additions we need to put in there. And then we need to talk about this. We need to have this conversation of whether or not it makes sense to have a sanctioned place, a soft landing where people can be connected to services and move on with their lives, because people find themselves in this situation for a variety of reasons. There are people, I can tell you, who say, I will not go to a shelter. My stuff gets stolen. I get sick. I will not go. Families don't want to be broken up, so maybe they won't go. There are people that are experiencing mental illness. There are people that are experiencing challenges with addiction. There are a whole variety of reasons. There are people that have had a major medical illness that can't pay their bills. Obviously, the economy factors into it as well. So there's a variety of reasons why people find themselves in this situation. And as a city and as a community, we have to try to meet people at their needs and figure out a lot of different ways to provide help for people while at the same time we have this awful challenge of funding at the state and federal level. So I'm not here to say this is going to be easy, simple, or, that we've got, a perfect plan, because we don't. We're trying and thinking every way we possibly can through the RFI, through the comprehensive plan, to address a situation that frankly has gone on for far too long, and we just are taking a slightly different approach. So I'll stop there, and I'll try to answer a question or two if I can.
I have a quick question. The land use code that's coming out of your office, is that the one to change it so that it's legal for encampments to happen on industrial zone properties?
Yeah, I believe so.
So is the intention there that then they can stay right at the base of Highland Park Drive?
I don't think it's quite that simple. Lisa would be, from Nick Licata's office, would be able to...
Can't hear the question or the answer.
My question was the intention behind changing the land use code so that encampments are allowed on industrially zoned properties. Is the intention there to keep the encampment here? And
let me address that by saying a couple of additional things. Right now, the mayor and the council did adopt one change that we think is very positive, and it's still pretty new, and perhaps folks may have missed it. The state of Washington, I think 2 years ago, actually had a Supreme Court ruling that said that religious organizations cannot be placed with undue burdens if they wish to host an encampment. Okay? So we came up with legislation that we proposed, that the council adopted, was signed by the mayor. We all feel pretty good about it, which basically says that if you're a religious organization and it's within your mission to host an encampment, you cannot have restrictions placed upon you to do that. So you may go ahead and do that. There are certain rules that apply, but essentially it puts us on the same level of the state, because we were experiencing there this very odd gray area where we had, again, this thing called a consent decree that kind of put certain restrictions, yet at the same time the state of Washington said you can't do that. So we proposed this law that is now adopted that says if you're a religious organization, you may host. Okay? There are other folks within the community, whether they're advocates or others, who have said, look, that's fine for the religious organizations, but what about nonprofit organizations that wish to do the same thing? That, again, is still under discussion. You can, as a nonprofit organization, many in the city, like El Centro de la Raza, near my neighborhood on Beacon Hill, have hosted Nickelsville. Others have done the same thing. They have to go through the permit process. They have to get a temporary use permit.
Is there a time limit? Temporary? Is that a time limit?
On the nonprofits, they have to. My understanding is the nonprofits do have to reapply, and there's a cost involved with that. There's some discussion as to whether or not the cost should be made smaller so that it's easier for the nonprofit to play a role. For churches, it's allowed outright, because that's what the state of Washington
So what about
says.
the city and SDOT? Is there no temporary restriction to them? I mean, you have no permit yourselves. You being SDOT.
We can't issue a permit because it's legal if it's a religious facility. There is a placeholder if you're a nonprofit organization, but as the city who owns the land, because it's not legal, it's not a legal place. We don't have it in the land use code. It's in this very odd place right now.
So how can the mayor say, I'm going to allow them to stay then? That's what none of us understand. Without any public comment at all, the mayor's office, which was a terrible disappointment to some of us, said, okay, you folks landed there, you know what, you're going to stay. I'm going to leave you there. Well, there was no discussion with the neighborhood. There was no interaction with the neighborhood at all before that happened.
Let's be clear about something. I can assure you, Nickelsville didn't tell us where they were going.
Yeah,
we had about the same amount of notice that you did, essentially. Okay. So because we own the land, and it is not, there's no legal placeholder for it. We can't issue a permit because it's not legal for them to be there. My letter, actually, that I'm carrying.
I'm sorry, did you say it's not legal for them to be there? Okay.
There's no legal pathway right now. That's exactly what will happen in the council. It'll be a discussion that the entire city will be essentially having through the council process with the update of the comprehensive plan to figure this out.
Like in 2018 or 2020, somewhere in that window, the discussion will happen, you think? Or when
no, it'll happen in 2012, actually.
Oh.
The conversation is going to happen in the spring.
In the springtime.
So let's just let the deputy mayor make a closing comment.
So
we'll
get council members.
and then let them have their say, then we can have a further discussion.
So that's just to say that the reason why, again, I'm going to go back to the way it was a few years ago. What happened a lot all over Seattle is that these encampments they pop up, they might be chased around by the police, they land someplace else. That's kind of the way it was essentially. It was almost, it was kind of like a little mini, war. You'd be here for a while, you'd be chased, you'd land here. We're trying our very best to, we've done it now for religious organizations, to create a clear set of, here's how you do it kind of thing. And we're in line with the state of Washington to make sure that happens so that we're not placing any undue burdens on the religious organizations. Nonprofit organizations, if they wish to host, there is a way for that to happen as well. The missing piece here is what do we do about situations like this? If you land on city property and we have nothing in the land use code that even talks about it, that's what we have to figure out. And it's not easy, but we feel we have to get there rather than go back to the way it was a few years ago. And with that, I'll stop and allow Councilmember Rasmussen to make comments, and I'm happy to stay and take more questions.
Good evening, I'm Tom Rasmussen. I'm a member of the City Council and member of the Housing and Human Services and Culture Committee. We used to call it the Health Committee. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm glad that you made it clear. When you were first talking about it, Mr. Smith, it sounded as though you proposed that the campus be allowed at the Soto site, and you had money available for about $800,000, and the council refused. And as a result, Nickelsville ended up here. The reality is, we couldn't approve it, and you made that clear later on, because it wasn't legal. They proposed that an encampment be there, but it wasn't legal to do. It was not consistent with our comprehensive plan or land use code, and the council can authorize something that's not legal, correct? So, what we did with that, about $800,000, is parked it, and we're using some of it for services for homeless families that are being provided those services now, and the rest is being held. So we didn't approve it because we didn't like it, it's just it wasn't legal. Now we're looking at other ways of meeting this need for shelter as well as temporary, perhaps encampments. And that will have to go through a legal process of land use code changes, a comprehensive plan change, and you will have the opportunity to comment on any of that and say whether you like those proposed changes or not. That's the legal, the fair, the democratic way to allow or not allow uses of our public land or private land. And we're going to be going through that process now. And Lisa Herbal from Councilmember Nick Licata's staff is also here. He chairs the committee, so generally a chair of a committee takes the lead on a particular subject matter. And Lisa, I'm sure, would be happy to talk about what his approach to this will be. But myself, I think that encampments should be temporary. They should not be permanent. The concern that I have, I know that they're needed. We don't have enough shelter. We don't have enough low-income housing. The problem that I see with encampments is that I have not seen services that actually help move people into shelter or permanent housing. People tend to stay there for a long time. And I have no sense that they actually are overcoming or working to overcome, the issues that have caused them to be homeless, which is tragic that people are homeless. I think we all agree, and I really respect you saying we all want to share in helping homeless people and helping people to overcome homelessness. I've heard that kind of generosity and that kind of concern expressed throughout Seattle, including Magnolia. And so we're all working to share this. But I would also say that not only should neighborhoods in Seattle work together to try to solve this problem, and I appreciate what Mr. Smith said about working together, but it's not just Seattle's issue alone. The folks who come here, who seek our help, are coming to Seattle because we're a compassionate city. And if you talk to people who are in the encampments or who are homeless, ask them where they came from, ask them where they went to high school, where did they live before. Rarely will you find a person who has been in Seattle long term. They will say, Aberdeen, Yakima, El Paso, why are you here? Because we heard that there was employment here, we thought we could get a job in fishing, or had a relative here and they kicked me out. What I'm trying to do, not only is to help people here in Seattle, but what I'm trying to do is to get people from around the region and the state to also provide the kind of services and show the compassion that you're showing here towards people who become homeless. And let me give you an example. I spoke at a mission about 2 years ago. We had a service remembering people who were veterans who were homeless and respecting them for their work. It's called the Bread of Life Mission, and it's been in Pioneer Square for some time. And after I spoke to the group, a man came up to me and he said, "I knew your brother." And I go, "Really?" My brother Don. "How did you know my brother?" "I grew up in Bellevue." And he said, "Well, you know, we went to school together." And I go, "Well, what's your name?" And he goes, "Robbie." And I go, "Robbie?" So I won't say his last name. But he grew up in Bellevue, lived in Eastgate where we live, and that's not the fancy part of Bellevue. It's not like Medina or Clyde Hill. And he's homeless. I said, "Well, what happened?" He says, "Well, things kind of fell apart. You know, he got divorced, he's got some other issues going on. There are no services in Bellevue for him, really. And so he's living in Seattle." What I want our community to do is to think more broadly. We want Bellevue to help. I used to work in homeless services, helping low-income senior citizens. And when I would go into a city like Bellevue or Tukwila and I say, "We need some help with minor home repairs so that seniors can stay, live with dignity and independence in their own home," the answer was basically, "No way. You know, we don't have a problem." Now it's starting to change, but it's really, really slow. So while we're working here in Seattle, and we're doing an extraordinary job, but we really need to get more people involved, more people helping, because homelessness is caused by other issues, whether it's domestic violence or the loss of a job or drug or alcohol addiction or mental illness. They don't just start in Seattle, it's everywhere. But we provide the services, and we're a compassionate city. But there's a limit to what we can do. As Darrell said, you know, our budget is limited. It's really limited, so we need to get other people to help. So we're trying to solve the land use issue, we're trying to solve the legal issues, but now, in the meantime, the encampment is here in your neighborhood, and you have concerns, and I understand that. I think it's also fair to allow Scott Morrow, who represents and has been the organizer for Share Wheel and this encampment, to speak about what his goals are and his intentions are. Maybe he's done that before, but Scott is here, and if it's all right with the leadership of this organization, I think it's important for Scott, who's one of the organizers, to talk about what his goals are, what his vision is, and, you know, the history of this as well.
Yes, I'm sorry to introduce Scott before. Scott, I don't know if you'd like to speak on behalf of Nickelsville.
May I say something?
Could I just
He's
say
our
something?
staff person, and
Excuse me, let me just explain. We're from Nickelsville,
yeah.
so beginning down there is Mr. Conte. Why don't you introduce yourselves? This is our staff person. We don't let him speak for the people who live in Nickelsville, so why don't you introduce yourself first?
Should we step up, please?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Good evening, members of the Highland Action Committee. We could like to introduce ourselves. Mr. Conte.
My name is Basil. I'm an arbitrator at Nickelsville.
I'm Nick Martin. I'm the Nickelsville bookkeeper.
I'm Peggy Hillitz, and I'm the liaison between the fiscal sponsor of Nickelsville, and I've been with Nickelsville since it was being planned.
Scott Morrow, Nickelsville staff.
I am a Nickelodeon. We are all living in Nickelsville at 7116 West Marginal Way.
The future of Nickelsville is planned to be a semi-permanent encampment sheltering up to 1,000 individuals. At the current site, we cannot get in more than 350, as you're fully aware. We're designed to follow green ecological practices to include recycling, clean burning stoves, as well as simple wooden structures for privacy and dignity, rather than tents and tarps. The simple, sturdy structures are designed to be dismantleable and movable. We plan on bringing showers and laundry services on site on trailer pods and have services on site for our campers to get to where they should be. The whole point of Nickelsville is that we're never going to be in one place forever. We're designed to be semi-permanent. We're designed to get people onto the next level. And we're also designed to come down when there's no affordable shelter and housing for everybody.
Right. And this can work within a three-part arrangement. Does Seattle City government help with utilities and let us use the land? The next step for land use changes onto the comprehensive plan and to let encampments be in industrial areas.
And our regular operating expenses will be paid for by public and private funders. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Why did you guys leave the fire station?
We agreed to stay there for 6 months. Our 6 months were up on May 13th.
It would only hold 100 people, and there are a great many more homeless people than that. And our goal was always to provide much more shelter than for 100.
Okay, I didn't quite hear that. Did you just say it's a you can stay there for 6 months and that's the limit?
The agreement with the fire station was for 6 months, throughout that winter. And at the end of the 6 months, that was the end of our contract, so we left.
That contradicts what Mr. Smith said, I think. Did I misunderstand that?
Yes.
Well,
The offer was there to stay longer, but they decided that at the end of their term, they would move.
And we decided that because the firehouse, and we used also the land outside, the small area, would only hold 100 people comfortably. And there are thousands of homeless people every night, so that is why we did not accept that offer.
I'd like to ask a question. So I understand if I listen to Deputy Mayor correctly, that the land down here, there's no legal precedence for you to be down there. How did your encampment end up picking that spot, and how were you able to just sort of land there without any legal pathway to be there?
Well, we have to go somewhere. We can't say just everybody's scattered, because we found out that it's much safer for everyone to be together. It's better for people to live in an organized, safe environment with rules and so on. So, we had moved 17 times while that original spot was empty the whole time. And so it seemed to make sense that we moved there. There aren't any houses immediately there. There's a bus stop there. So for a number of reasons, it has enough room for more than 100 people.
But there's no legal pathway for you to be there, and you don't...
That is right, and we would love to work with the city and have an agreement on all of those things. We welcome that. We would love to do that, and we always do stick to the agreements that we do make. And we would also like to have utilities, so we could have water and sewer on the site and have things, a little nicer. So yeah, we'd be happy to work with the city to agree on those details.
But in the meantime, you plan on just staying down there for an indeterminate amount of time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
My question is for Scott. In March or May, was it, for the firehouse? That you had to leave the
May
fire-
13th.
Okay. So on May 13th, you took the people that you're helping govern, my question is for you, Scott, and you said, let's all move. Why didn't 50 people stay at the firehouse and 50 people come to the other place, and then you take your structure that you've built, which I think is a great thing, where we don't allow the drinking, we don't allow the drugs, we don't allow the sex offenders, and you take what you've learned and then you grow up to your 100 here and you grow up to your 100 here, and then maybe you've got another place. Why would you just desert the firehouse? It's shelter and it's got running water. Why would everybody leave? I don't understand that.
Because it was crowded. Even with the limit of 100 people, we were having people sleeping side by side. That is not, in my opinion, humane. That's not dignified. At the new site, we have to transfer the entire crew to have at least a tent between them and the neighbor.
You're Scott?
I'm Nate Martin.
Who's Scott? Okay, my question was for Scott.
Sorry.
He can't talk, is that the thing?
Sorry, Madam. Scott don't make decisions in Nickelsville. We used to have a Sunday meeting, mandatory meeting. Scott don't make decisions.
Then what does Scott do?
Scott is a camp advisor person.
He brings us information, so that's the key job of an organizer, is to make sure that.
Okay, so because I called Scott one time because I was given the phone number because I wanted to set up something for help and I never got a return call. So my concern is Scott looking out for your folks' best interest?
It has been since the beginning.
I was kind of wondering if maybe you guys could comment a little bit on the dynamic here. We all agree that we want individuals to move on from Nickelsville to better themselves in their lives. But in the same community here in West Seattle, we have people fighting to prevent new housing from going in that would allow these people to have more of an opportunity to move on. There are not presently locations in these cities for people to move on. And so how does it feel? What is the dynamic to have a neighborhood that is both fighting for this permanent housing, that at the same time they are fighting because you do not have permanent housing?
Are you talking about the new Delridge Center? Is that what you're talking about?
We're here with concerns about Highland Park.
Well, yeah, but the dynamic is my...
Apples and oranges. If you
Well, wait, let's lay it on the table. First of all, I'm thankful for you guys creating a nice organization. And so far I haven't seen any problems. And it seems like you've put together some rules and a fairly good structure down there. So I really appreciate that. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm going to say that if I were a person looking for a new home to purchase some real estate or to purchase a rental property, and I was aware that there was a homeless encampment, and you can call it an eco-ville, but the reality is if it were a permanent homeless encampment, it would vary my decision on whether to buy that property or whether to rent that house. So it does affect real estate values that people have worked for all their lives.
That's actually not factually true.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, I would bet, I don't think I'm unique, okay?
Okay, but there are other...
I don't think that I'm unique, and I think that probably if you talk to 90% of the populace, they would say, if that's the case, why don't the real estate flyers say, homeless encampment, 2 miles away? So let's not be deceptive. Now, if I were a city council person, I would say to my fellow city council members, can we be fair to all the great citizens of Seattle, regardless of political clout? And I'd say, let's find a long-term solution to this. And the long-term solution might be, I wonder if we could find multiple locations around the city that would house X number of people on a temporary basis, because I believe that's the key, is temporary basis. If I were seeking out that real estate and I knew that that homeless encampment was meant to be for 12 months and that's all it was going to be, wouldn't trouble me a bit.
You mean similar to King County?
So I would say to my fellow city council members, I wonder if we could find 15 sites that could, we have parks, we have all sorts of places around the city that could house 350 people for 12 months with their semi-permanent structures that are movable, and then set up a schedule and say, we're going to be here, this year, or this 8 months, give them a permit for 6 to 8 months. This 8 months, Nickelsville is going to be here, and it's going to be here. You might even have 2 rotating Nickelsvilles. But if people knew that it was not permanent, I think they would be okay with it. I believe that. So I think the city council member there is right on. I think he's got a grasp.
So you mean like the King County tent cities? Because there are multiple tent cities that travel throughout King County presently that Nickelsville is based on.
I'm just saying the difference is between a permanent encampment and a temporary encampment. And if you plan it so that people are moving, and let's, like I said, let's be fair to all the citizens of Seattle, regardless of political clout, and so it might be in Madison Park, right?
Right. So
now it's nothing. No, it's nothing against these folks. It's just that there's a reality of what happens to the value of your properties, of your real estate. It may be a perception, but it's a reality. That's all.
Yeah, can we have the council members and the deputy mayor respond to the idea of a roving Nickelsville? And I also want to hear from Nickelsville after that what an appropriate time frame. Like we proposed 6 months in our letter, but I don't know what makes sense when you're job searching. What makes sense is 8 months a year.
Well, I feel compelled to respond because I did work in real estate for 15 years. Actually, I have a lot of clients here in Highland Park, old friends. Which is a side note, but I will also say that the exact situation that you're describing actually did exist and still does. Nickelsville, I believe, moved 17 times over their existence, so they were
in what period of time?
3 years.
I'm suggesting that they move once every 8 months.
So
maybe even once a year. Not 17 times.
Point of clarity, they were evicted 17 times.
Well, I can't comment on that.
If there was a plan in place and you said, here's the schedule, here's the plan, and you just said they're going to be here, now they're going to be here.
Hey guys, we understand where you're coming from. Let's go to finish his comments and then you can respond again.
So these are exactly the types of questions that actually can be part of the discussion in the comprehensive plan update. These are the kinds of questions that need to be discussed. What is the best way for something like this to work? Because it is a reality that tent encampments are here. They are to pretend that we don't have people living in a variety of ways. And I live in Columbia City, the other side of Beacon Hill. We've got a very active encampment of folks in the Greenbelt there for as long as I can remember, essentially. Now that's beginning to change, but it creates a new problem, the challenge that we have to deal with, which are those folks that we've not been able to get into a shelter, that are very shelter resistant. That's a whole other category. But I think to your point, it's, look, what are the different ways we can meet this challenge? I'm holding here a couple of stats. I'm just going to share this with you just to give you some perspective here, because I asked the Human Services Department to provide this for me today. Affordable housing projects for families with children in West Seattle, okay? There are 15 projects in West Seattle, including new projects under development. Of these projects, 9 buildings, total 215 units, have units with 2 or more bedrooms for families with kids. A total of 156 have 2 or more bedrooms, because families obviously aren't just limited to 1 or 2 kids like my family is, right? 6 of these projects are providing permanent housing for formerly homeless families with children. 52 units are dedicated to formerly homeless households within the projects. The majority of the family projects in the OH portfolio, Office of Housing, have been developed by DNDA, good organization. 6 projects with 140 units. There are other players involved as well, Compass Housing Alliance, Catholic Housing Services, Seattle Housing Authority. That sounds really, really good, and yet we still don't have enough units for folks, and the council member is exactly right. It's not just a Seattle issue. This is King County and statewide. It's a big, big issue. So even though there's a lot of investment there, we clearly don't have enough options for people. The shelter RFI that I mentioned, just to give you a couple of details of the things we're thinking about to get at this issue, okay? 24-hour shelter, that's something we'd like to take a look at. Reconciliation programs. Councilmember Rasmussen mentioned that many people are coming from other places because Seattle has a better climate, say, than where I come from, New Jersey in the winter. So maybe they come out here, maybe they think there's a job opportunity. Well, we want to look at programs for families and others for reconciliation. Integration of services at existing day centers, evening shelter programs, flexible funding and services to meet immediate short-term needs. These right now do not exist writ large in our delivery system. So we have to look at ourselves clearly and say, we've got some great providers out there, but everything can always be improved. And it's really upon us to take a look at that. So I hope the new RFI coming out this spring will start to take a look at this. We do have great providers on the ground, the ones that I mentioned, just being a handful, to get at these issues. And to your comment specifically, the council's process will provide that forum for us to have exactly those types of discussions.
And we're all for having negotiations with the city council on agreements on times at different locations, on permanent sites, temporary sites, or what have you. We're open for all that, and utilities and what have you, if we could. We're open to it.
I think, why can't there be encampments all over the city? It's because people fear that it's not in control and that it's going to be there forever. If you had a plan that could be explained to people and it was not a permanent basis, I think people would accept it.
Well, to be frank, part of that is what we've done with legislation just recently for religious organizations. Churches, synagogues, mosques can be anywhere, and they have the right to host if that's part of their mission. Many don't, but some do. They can do that right now. They absolutely can.
We have 3 people with hands up. Okay, good.
Well, first of all, I think the folks from Nickelsville should sit down, because I think this discussion, I don't have a problem with them. They're just living here in the neighborhood. They're my neighbors. I was coming here today to hear from my elected government, essentially. And all I'm hearing is some obfuscating, which is essentially, Aunt Sally is, we didn't tell you Aunt Sally was coming this year to the holidays, and she's here, and she's going to be here for a year. We forgot to mention it to you, but it's okay. She can just stay in the backyard. It's not going to be a problem. And I mean, it's great that we have, I appreciate your larger view of the problems and the overview of that, which is a very smart political thing. But I think a lot of people here want to know what's going to happen. Like, what is the short term, how can this work for people here in the short term? We're not seeing any response from you dealing with that question. Essentially, you're just saying, well, just don't worry about it. We're going to talk about it in the spring, which is essentially saying to me, these are my neighbors. Have a nice time. And I'd like to hear the council members respond to that.
Okay, hold on. Just let's get this next.
Well, no, actually, I had a very similar question. I was curious what our short-term plan was, and then we talk about the spring, city council starts to discuss this. What does that actually mean? That whole process, is that a year-long discussion and public comment process? So what's the actual time frame? It's not April, right? It's a year plus April. And what happens?
For 2 years.
Right. So then what happens in the short term? And I want to say, you know, I'm sorry you have to hear the negative stuff. I think you guys have been doing a great job. But I do think we just want to be informed and know what's going on. And so, you know, it's a little awkward having both parties here, I have to admit.
And then last one, Sean.
My question was, what liabilities or possible litigation has the city assumed by allowing Nickelsville to reside on their property?
Okay, that's it for now, and then we'll let them respond, and then we'll see if there's any other. Unless you have a really pressing question.
I'll wait till.
Okay.
You're done with these, and I got a question.
I'll let Councilmember Rasmussen and Lisa talk about the council's process. They know it far better than I do in terms of those timelines and such. I'm not well versed in that. I will share with you a letter that I wrote to the Nickelsville organization. The date came out as today's date. It's actually but essentially the letter was to say the location that you moved to, is the glass yards. The property is owned by the Seattle Department of Transportation. This is owned by lawyers, of course, as well. It's not zoned residential currently. We talk about the legislation that we put before the City Council to attempt to establish a city-sanctioned encampment with the sort of strings and rules and, you know, the vision that we were putting forward, which would have those connected services. It also says that it's not a phase 1 or 2 environmental report about the property down there. It's some one-pager that basically says this was used for this purpose in the past, and so therefore I'm kind of putting them on notice that we don't know what the quality of the dirt is, 10, 20 feet down, but you should know that this is what we do know. It also says that, so that part is in there, and also it says essentially that without that phase 2, we can't tell you what the quality is, and also that the City Council has to go through, since it is in their purview in terms of the land use, to actually take up this conversation. Is not something the executive can do. So they can talk to you about timelines, but in terms of liability, I had to write that letter and make sure that the law department reviewed that letter and was in agreement with what I was sending, because that was the right thing to do on the advice that I had from the Seattle Department of Transportation, saying, look, you just have to acknowledge that we don't have this figured out in our land use code, so you have to send this letter, which I did.
So that letter would absolve the city of any liability?
Like
if someone falls on my property, they can claim against my homeowners.
I
would just fall in a ditch.
I'm hesitant to answer that because I'm not an attorney. I can't say that. That would be a better question for the law department, not for me as deputy mayor of community, so I'm not able to really answer that question. That's the truth.
So
my question.
I think that she asked a question of me, right? And so there are options that I see that we have, and maybe there are more, but they're on city property, so we could negotiate with Nickelsville to ask them to move voluntarily. They're on city property. They could be evicted tomorrow if the city wished to do that. Or we can go through the land use code process, and they could remain there until that process is completed. And that may take a year at least. A change to the land use code, particularly the comp plan, is a very formal process that I would say takes about a year from when it starts, but Lisa knows the schedule better than I do. So, the options aren't really great, are they? Eviction, right?
Yep.
Does the city have
negotiated move, right?
I suppose.
Okay. Or they can stay because the city owns it, and the city can say, okay, you can stay until this process is completed, and then there would be a determination of whether or not it would be legal to stay. So if there are other options, you know, I'm all ears. But right now, Nickelsville is there because we're there.
Does the city have the latitude to do a temporary resolution? In other words, it wouldn't necessarily be a full land use change. It would be a temporary resolution saying that we're going to allow this temporarily on various properties.
Well, not without the underlying legal authority, land use authority. Remember, one of the things that we are sworn to do is to uphold the law. That just doesn't mean criminal law. That means land use law as well, right? So all laws, and so that's why when the mayor proposed allowing Nickelsville or an encampment to go to the Sunny Gym, we can't do it, right? So we're looking at, you know, other options. And
you can't give a temporary use permit.
Right.
For
One is land use code changes.
Not authorized.
And
simply because at the end of that temporary use, they'd be there illegally as they are today. What we have accomplished.
Just real quickly, so on what the process is. The council set a docket, which is a list of all of the comp plan amendments that they would like to deliberate over the next year. They set that docket in August. DPD, as of just this month, I think, actually, I think it was towards the end of November, gave its comments on those proposed amendments, and some of them are community proposed amendments, some of them are amendments that the council proposed. They're not scheduled to approve amendments until August, and the comp plan, just so you understand, it's a sort of conceptual, high-level document. It isn't the land use code itself. It basically says what's allowed to be in the land use code. So once we pass the comp plan, then we have to implement it with legislation changing the land use code. So that process, I'm just being straight with everybody, it takes a while. And within that process, we'd have a discussion about, well, if this is going to be an allowed use here where it's not, what would be the community's expectations, what would be the council's expectations, and that would be legislative.
So, go ahead.
My question would be to go back to the liability issue. Is the liability for the city any greater with Nickelsville existing people camping in that field than it would be if they were camping on the sidewalks or on the meridians or on any other public space?
I don't want to provide legal counsel, so it's a fair question. It's a good question in terms of what the city's responsibilities or liability is for the use of its property, whether it's legal use or illegal use.
Tom, can you have maybe the city lawyer take that question and get back to this community?
Can you take that question to the city lawyer?
Yeah, I was trying to imagine what I would hear from Pete Holmes tomorrow. You did what? I'll certainly ask. I mean, I have no hesitation about asking.
What was his name? It's an interesting
Pete Holmes is the
city
name.
attorney.
Pete Holmes is the name of the elected city attorney.
One piece that wasn't discussed was that I think is mentioned here and in the letter relates to the provision of water and sewage. I can tell you that this was taken up as an issue during the budget discussions, and a couple of council members supported discussing it, potentially allocating a small amount of money to provide for sewage and water, but it was tabled because of concerns about allocating city funds for changes to a property that would assist unauthorized use.
Dorsey.
So it sounds like there's basically three options, and that's the three of you keep coming back to. It's eviction, they leave voluntarily, or we go through this land use process. Now Nickelsville has said that they're not ready at this point to leave. It sounds like there are people here who are concerned about the time it would take to do the land use process. So could you discuss what an eviction would look like, the city's process for that, and whether or not, in your opinion, that would actually solve any of the concerns that the community is bringing up tonight?
Great question, Dorsey. I don't know what an eviction would look like. I can share with you that in terms of 7th and Cherry, where we have a very active encampment of what I would deem, and I don't know the individuals personally, but I do know that we've been there before with our Human Services Department. Al Poole is here, who does a lot of work in this area, has a lot of expertise around what we call street outreach, and sent outreach there I don't know how many times. And many people have said, you know, thank you for the offer, I'm not going to a shelter. In fact, you know, when SPD comes around to say, you know, this 10-foot wide median 20 feet from the entrance of I-5 is not a safe place for you to be. You really need you to go to another location. Folks come right back, and so it's a real challenge for us. That's the only, I would even call it an eviction, because we've changed actually last February, I believe. We changed the protocols that the city of Seattle uses for encampments. It is different. In our view, it's a little bit more humane. We now send outreach as a matter of course. We also, if a posting is going to occur, say there's no camping here, we provide more time. We want more outreach to happen. We want more communication to happen. The protocols used to be essentially that it was a very short amount of time. People didn't get very much notice. We're not sure if outreach was happening on a regular basis, and we wanted to make sure that happened because certainly this administration believes that, you know, having conversation, getting people connected to services and providing options is a good positive thing to do. And, you know, money is tight everywhere. You know, I'm in too many awful discussions with the executive about, you know, what we don't have and some of the priorities and choices that he's left with. But we certainly think those protocols make sense. So to your question about what does an eviction look like at something like Nickelsville, I've never been involved with anything like that, so I can't really put a picture to it. So you're right, there are these three options. I think from the executive's point of view, and a couple of months ago, the council did adopt a resolution that said they would look at a number of different possibilities, including, you know, motel vouchers, the possibility of a sanctioned encampment. I think there was even purchasing a hotel in there. Now, you know, all of these things require dollars, so that's part of one of the challenges we're facing. But I think the executive and the council are generally in agreement that having the conversation finally makes a lot of sense. So from my perspective, I think we can say, we'd like to have the conversation and think that that makes sense. So would I prefer that over mass evictions with SPD? I think I would.
And just as a clarification, the bigger challenge than convincing people to go into shelter who are sleeping outside, the bigger challenge is the capacity. On any given night, when we have 3,500 shelter beds in this city that are full, there are 1,700 people sleeping outside in our green belts, in doorways, and in cars. So the bigger issue is, and any discussion about an eviction needs to take that context into consideration. This is 140 people. When there are another 1,200 roaming around the city right now.
When I call Al and say, can you send outreach to this location, the idea here is that the outreach workers who do incredible work actually have to be able to say to the individual they encounter, there is a place for you. It can't just be, move on, here's my card. It's actually, do we have a place? That's really important. And as Lisa says, the numbers don't lie. I mean, we don't have enough spaces for everyone. The shelter beds are full. We have an emergency shelter for men at City Hall that opened, I believe, October 1st. I get an email about 4:30 in the morning every day. It's full, 75 capacity, day after day after day. Fry Hotel for women, capacity, day after day after day. And yet, you know, there are certainly more people out there. So that's one of our challenges as well.
We have a question in the back.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Now, earlier on, you had said that there was a place down in Soto that you thought would be an acceptable place for Nickelsville to be, but it was determined that it wasn't legal for them to be there. Well, it's not legal for them to be here. Why not have them move to the place that it wasn't legal for them to be, but you considered it was a better place for them?
More services.
There was more services
Nobody
there.
moved Nickelsville here.
Right, I know.
The issue with Soto was that they were going to spend, the executive was asking the council to spend money. The council couldn't vote to spend money at a location that was an unauthorized location.
Can you tell them where that unauthorized location is?
Well, so this is a follow-up question. This is a question that is there a way for the city to be proactive about land, maybe not a building, but land that has some services already that the city owns that might be a slightly better condition, living-wise, in terms of connection to actual services, connection to grocery, connection to water, connection to sewer, that already exists? Can you identify 6 sites in the city and give that list to these guys as better places to go?
Very interesting. You mean like the fire department they chose not to stay at?
So,
I'm just saying, but that's being used. Options that maybe are better places than where they are now, so that in negotiations moving forward.
It's a great comment and question, and we did ask several of our departments to identify your inventory of things you own. And as it turns out, the city actually doesn't own a lot of suitable property. A lot of it's kind of slopey and boggy, and the stuff we have is not great. Correct. There's a lot of what we own are weird little odd-shaped, dinky properties. I mean, there's not. We thought there was. We were sort of some folks had said, well, the city's got this vast store of land. Why don't they? As it turns out, we actually don't have a vast store of land. A lot of it is what you see at the bottom of the hill. It's green belts. It's owned by Seattle City Light. It's this skinny with 2 freeways next to it. So we did an inventory and found that we actually didn't have a lot of viable property. Some of it's parks property too, which has a whole another set of rules and regulations as a parks board. All of these sorts of things. So we did do that.
Did you engage staff in that conversation too, or is that all part of the same inventory?
I have a quick question. Has Port of Seattle ever offered up any of their property, like the 15-acre cap? That's just.
Do you have any idea that the history with the Port of Seattle with these folks?
No.
Oh my God! We went through 3 months of pure hell to get them out of T107 in September of '09. And we're kind of against the same boat, but the thing that I'll try to say as respectfully as I can, the thing with T107 is the Port of Seattle had the kahunas to stand up and say, we have to do something, right? The issue at hand today, you guys, is that these folks are living in an area not zoned for them to live in. And the zoning is set up for the greater Seattle area so that we all have as high a quality of neighborhoods as we can have. We're asking the city to enforce their own zoning restrictions on property they happen to own, and they're not doing it. It's such an interesting conversation, and I love the fact that you guys are so engaged. I love this letter that you two put together. You did a great job. The reality is we can't change anything unless we get our elected officials to do what they're elected to do. Enforcing the rules and regulations and laws of our city is something we should be able to expect. What you're saying by saying nothing is that, yes, we can allow you folks to live here. It's illegal, but we're not going to kick you out. And I would propose that you might say, we need you folks to move on until we can establish the legality and the proper use of this property. But you're just allowing this. And one last thing I'd love to say, I'm trying not to eat up a whole bunch of time here, but you keep referring to this soft landing spot. One of the things that, in my opinion, that we struggle with the Nickelsville encampment is all of the soft landing spots you mentioned have the sort of what they view as strings attached for betterment, right? There's some job opportunities, there's there's restrictions related to these services, the social services that are provided, but they have to comply. So the church-driven ones, for example, that I'm involved with, you have to go through some career counseling kind of stuff. There's things that they have to do. I would propose to you, again, with as much respect as I can muster, that a large percentage of these folks really don't want to move. This is where they want to be, right? There isn't any drive for betterment here. And so are we enabling here? Are we handing a man a fish rather than teaching them to fish? And I'll stop talking.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Joanne Braden. I am not a Highland Park resident. However, I crossed the berm at Nickelsville right after they moved back to West Seattle because a friend of mine that you met the last time that Nickelsville residents came here to speak, Mike, was evicted from his apartment. There were a group of us who were trying to keep Mike in his apartment, but unfortunately we couldn't do that, and his only option at that point was Nickelsville. So I came over 2 days after he moved in to visit. I'm trying, well, he's the gentleman sitting in front of you on oxygen. The gentleman sitting in front of you on oxygen.
I know this.
I know, and I love him dearly. He would like nothing better than to be able to be employed and to leave. The only reason I'm speaking up today is because I think it's very easy for us, until we actually get involved with a community like Nickelsville, and believe me, I had absolutely no intention whatsoever of becoming involved with Nickelsville. I'm 62 years old, I have severe fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, I'm disabled, I have 2 rescue dogs, I had a life that was more than I could handle. But it turns out that when you become involved down at Nickelsville, and I have become very involved, you discover the stories, and I won't name names, but people who are there at Nickelsville only because some life event derailed them so badly that they could not recover. They didn't have family, or perhaps their family was not able to help them recover. Perhaps at the point that they were derailed, they went off the deep end. I mean, I've got family members who've been off the deep end, and believe me, it took years to get them back out of the gutter and back into society. Well, perhaps at the point they were derailed, they did go off the deep end. Well, that suddenly makes them them, as opposed to the guy who lives next door to you. These people are now my neighbors. I am part of the Nickelsville community. I don't live in Nickelsville, but I'm definitely part of that community. I am there on the ground in Nickelsville almost every single day for some time between 3 to 5 hours, and the greatest gift I give to Nickelsville, in spite of the fact that I'm the lady who calls up the gravel truck, the greatest gift I give to Nickelsville is to come down, to listen to their stories, to sit down with a guy who ended up in a medical crisis, well, to sit down with a guy just recently who ended up accused of a crime, incarcerated in our city system, lost his house, lost everything he owned. When he came out, he just needed somebody to sit down and help him file his taxes. So I sat down and helped the man file his taxes so he would have money coming back, so he could pay his union dues, so he could go back to work. These are the kinds of things that normally you and I have someone who can sit down and go, hey, you know, let me help you file your taxes. Let me help you fill out the paperwork for your Social Security disability. Let me help take you grocery shopping so that you have the groceries you need for the next week. Let me help you do that thing that allows you to not spend every hour of your day surviving and spend part of your hours trying to build a better life.
We have a couple of people with their hands up.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comment. Dorsal, you have your hand up.
I just really want to quickly add to that some of these people that you're describing as unmotivated are combat veterans. They served for this country in Vietnam, Panama, Iraq the first time, Iraq the second time, Iraq the third time, and Afghanistan, not counting all the many deployments they've gotten to do. So yeah, maybe he's a little unmotivated because he's seen 3 of his friends get blown up by an IED. Maybe he needs a little bit of time to get focused. But thankfully he has a community that is willing and able to support a veteran.
I think we're on the same page.
We're all on the same page. We're starting to get derailed. Everyone has their own stories. Nicole.
I'm just going to make a quick comment. We have two like threads of thought going on here. But really what we have is a problem and the symptoms of the problem. And we're a compassionate community, like you mentioned. We're all compassionate people. And the stories you just shared, I think that we all can, our heart goes out to everybody in the situation. The problem is, that is the problem. But we're also addressing the symptom of the problem, which these encampments and the tent cities that are going up. And so I think the question we're trying to ask is, what are you trying to do to address the problem so we don't have to have these type of discussions. We're not saying we don't, I think we're all compassionate people. What we're bringing out here is kind of, the bad side of it, you know? What can we do to help the people that are in this situation so that we don't have to deal with these encampments that you can just let pop up anywhere?
Let me just say one thing. This could go on for 2 or 3 more months, years. Okay, and it will. It definitely will. But we need to bring this meeting somewhat to a close, and we just need to let these 4 individuals that came here tonight with a lot of courage to have some closing comments. Try to bring it to a close. Well, okay. We can keep on. Hey, we can take a consensus here. If all of us want to stay here another hour, we can. But I don't think.
Is the city telling us that basically what I heard him saying is that if we have to help 2,000 people, there's 3,000 people to help, but we can only help 2,000. So they're up to their limit. They're out of money. It's time. I think they're telling us that somebody else, either they have to turn a blind eye or somebody else has to help because the money's not there. Yeah. So as citizens that are still, fortunate enough to have a house, if it's going to fall into our neighborhoods and onto our shoulders, then we have to do something. And I think that all of us complaining about what the city isn't doing isn't going to get us anywhere.
Well,
I would like to say something that piggybacks on that, which is if you guys can't handle it, at least ask us, have the courtesy to ask us to take this on. And say please, will you Highland Park residents consider hosting Nickelsville for another 2 years, which is what you're saying in essence by not saying anything.
And I can say that if you said that, 2 years would not sound that big of a deal.
But you need to ask us.
The issue is that we're never going to end this. We're never going to stop homelessness. In fact, in some ways, these guys are a big family. I'm sure that they've been together a long time. They love each other. They feel strong with each other. They don't want to, in some ways, there are a couple of you mentioned, maybe they don't want to move out. Well, that may be the case. If they got a great job, they may want to stay there with their family. But the thing is, each neighborhood, our neighborhood cannot burden this by ourselves. We will for a finite amount of time. We'd be happy to. We're very gracious to help, and we're compassionate for wherever we understand. But there's got to be something that happens quickly, and some discussion that the city directly responds to our community, and not just West Seattle. Highland Park. I mean, everyone likes to say this is a West Seattle issue. Okay, Highland Park is on the edge of West Seattle here. That is true. But this is a Highland Park issue, and that's why Carolyn and I wrote this letter, and that's why you guys are here. And so we need some answers, and we really appreciate you guys coming. Sure.
Can I ask the one question beyond that? And that is, if indeed Highland Park or West Seattle or whoever is going to be asked to help with the homeless issue at Nickelsville, which, by the way, we sort of already are, what can we legally do?
That's not an answer that can be. That's not a question.
No, what I mean is things like.
Okay.
We're talking property. I'm concerned with things like water.
They're living in the top.
Okay, they got the question. They can internalize.
So a couple of things. First of all, I appreciate all of your comments, your intelligence, and your passion on this issue, and frankly, the fact that Highland Park is a caring community, and many of you are involved with Nickelsville, as evidenced by this lady here, and I thank you for that. The question there in the back of what can we as a community do, and is the rest of the city sharing in this burden of dealing with the issue of homelessness? I can assure you that many are. I live in Rainier Valley, and we have DESC there. We have a lot of organizations that are trying to do this work. There are, because of the change that we made in an ordinance, churches now can do a little bit more, we hope. I have to say, I'll be on the Seattle Channel tomorrow afternoon reporting that, we just had this ordinance change, and there aren't 25 churches that have said, I'm in, I want to host an encampment. We hope that more will get involved. I can share with you that in Ballard, there is a pilot program by a church that said, we want to host an encampment, but we actually want to focus on people and families that are living in their cars, because you know what? That's a huge issue in Seattle that some folks don't really know about, but it's a big issue in Ballard. And here's another challenge, right? You can call and complain if you do enough. Eventually, if SDOT has money in their budget, which they frankly don't, they'll post signs saying no parking. There are lots of people that are living in their cars because that's all they have right now. So what do we do about that? So Councilmember O'Brien proposed, and his colleagues agreed, there's a pilot project at the Redeemer's Church in Ballard where they can host people camping in their cars. It'll be interesting to see how that works. Maybe we'll have more of that can actually provide a little bit of a safe place. So the idea of looking at a lot of different options is what we really need to do. That's what we can all do as a community. So the shelter RFI that I talked a little bit about. And to be frank about it, we have great providers in the city of Seattle. We have our Office of Housing. We have our housing levy. Thank you, Seattleites, for taxing yourselves to put money in a pot for affordable housing, much of which helps homeless individuals and families. We do a lot, but we can always look at other jurisdictions and other systems and improve. There are jurisdictions across the country that don't have as many people on the street as we do. They probably have enhanced shelters and 24-hour shelters and a few different options that we'd like to take a look at. We need to look at that, we need to see what works and what doesn't, and add into our shelter system, and we're going to do it. And we'll need everyone to kind of weigh in on that and help us make sure that we can find, putting pressure on the state, the feds, whoever, to make sure that we've got the funding to make that system better, because it really needs to be better. So we can all work on that. Be a part of the conversation that the council will undertake this spring about land use. Because those three options that have been laid out, call the police and run Nickelsville out, provide a legal pathway by which we can figure out what this really means, because it's not just Nickelsville, there are little encampments all over Seattle, not the least of which is the one I mentioned on 7th and Cherry that's very unsafe. Or we find some middle path, and I don't know what the answer is. So I appreciate the compassion that Highland Park has shown for the folks that have been involved. We have to just figure this out. We just feel as an administration, the mayor does, that choice one of simply sending the police and doing a mass eviction, it doesn't further the conversation on how to really figure this out. And we're not in this by ourselves. This is a county issue. It's a state issue. We need lots of partners. The 10-year plan to end homelessness, on purpose, is not just the city of Seattle. We're a major player. We invest a lot of money into it. But it's the county. It's all sorts of folks. Because it really is a shared problem. It's not just Highland Park. It's a challenge that the entire city is trying to face. So I appreciate you having me here tonight and allowing me to speak with you and have conversation. It will not be the last, and we'll just try our very best.
Does Seattle own the parks, or is that just a different park? Does Seattle actually own the parks?
We do.
So we own the parks, it's just a different department.
It's a different department, but the parks has a slightly different structure. There's a parks board and all of that as well.
Maybe part of the solution.
Thank you all very, very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Wonderful, very thoughtful questions and wonderful expression of compassion and concern. One of the things that I do take away from this is that you want to see some certainty about how this will all end. How long is this going to go on, and what kind of an end plan is there? And I think that that's what we need to discuss with the mayor's office, because as we know that the land use process can be very long. So it's a question, is the answer, this is going to go, Nickelsville will stay here until the land use process is completed, which could take at least through August, maybe at the end of next year. Yes, next year, 2012. Or is there some other solution that could be identified and agreed upon prior to that time?
We're happy to work with council on that, for sure.
But will that not happen until the spring, you say? Or is there a way that can be moved up on the schedule?
Well, I mean, the conversation can begin now. Right.
But they'd be on two different tracks,
right? It's different than the whole land use.
Yeah. The legislative process we can't move up because there are all these notice periods and appeal periods that have to be worked into the legislative process. But that's really the council's way of having that kind of conversation that you're asking for, I think, with the executive. Because, I mean, the council is a legislative body, right? We're not in a position to say, to take an eviction action. But we can work with you on the legislative process and what it would look like to permit a community like this here in this neighborhood or in other neighborhoods in a way that respects your needs for your neighborhood. So, and I just want to also understand your neighbor. I live on then I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but yeah.
So to come up with a temporary solution then to be able to get these guys power and water, heat for the winter. What are our options for that?
Well, last year we offered up the firehouse because it was available and usable. There's nothing preventing a faith organization for wanting to do something similar right now because we did change, we created a new ordinance to allow that. That's, I suppose, a possibility. Any private property owner with a building or a lot could also step up.
Well, that's a good idea. I mean, are you members of your churches around here? I mean, that would be something that maybe you could take back to your church and let them know that we're your temple.
I think critically too, it's a time frame. There's a lot of faith-based from Woodinville that they've worked with them, but there's a time, there's a start and an end to it. It's finite. And this doesn't seem like anybody's talking about it being finite.
You're just, it's not finite, it's clarification. They just have to change the law, change the rule.
That's a state
The rules
requirement.
are there already because each city from Woodinville to about, I don't know if you guys have had any other areas, it's either 90 days or 120, and it's move on into places immaculately clean afterwards, and they move. And you get the big discussion was whose jobs are where and what that is. It's just living capacity as they all move around. Is it a shared community? Is it a shared where everybody is working? Is it central? Those could be good questions, but it's all finite. It's all in a time frame. And here, how long is this? Has it been going? How long is it going to be planned to go? That's not right to do that to this community and not do it to other parts of the community or even within Seattle city limits. A month ago, I turned on TV and saw the PD, rousting people that were, standing and protesting and camping out with the same city law land. And they pushed them off. At 2 o'clock in the morning, sirens, bloop, 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 making it very unreasonable for them to want to sleep. And I don't understand the law of that being different when it's still the same city limits.
So for several years, 10 years I believe, the consent decree is a document that was signed by a couple of organizations and nonprofits, had those sort of rules in place, 90 days here, then you move to a next post, and most of them were churches, frankly.
Yes.
Now, the new ordinance essentially supersedes that. It does say that faith community, whether it's West Seattle, Magnolia, Magnolia Valley, where I live.
What is the time frame, though, of the new ordinance?
There is no restriction.
So you can open it up to whatever.
Yeah,
because all I'm
correct.
hearing other communities doing is 90 days and 120 days.
Well, the state of Washington says that we actually can't put any kind of burdens on those faith
And this
communities.
is specifically for faith communities. There's another temporary land use permit process where you can get a 6-month permit. We have that here in Seattle. There's another encampment called Encampment 3 that utilizes that process. Moves around. They also have locations in King County, and it's typically, you're right, 3 to 6 months.
I'm saying these are laws that are being abided in other cities.
Well,
But
in here
when we
too.
come around through here, it's like I'm hearing that it's kind of like, no, we're going to try to do it this way or this way with land use action that could go 2 years. And it just seems to me, legally, I need to hear from an attorney that's representing, would be better to have somebody come here and say, yes, this is, and no, this isn't. And not say that it's not just an issue that you're trying to solve, but a lot of people here are just saying legality. We're all supposed to follow the rules. The rules say this. And if we're sitting here debating different things, the rules are the rules.
Well, like I said, a faith community can step up tomorrow down the block and host this community. That can happen. That can absolutely happen. Nothing is preventing that from happening.
I think if it is more visuals and more people, I think people would even have it impacting even more. Even with people in the news recently who are saying if somebody's going to get evicted, they're having people come and just camp out and be there. As soon as the furniture comes out, they put it back in. It's just a thing of saying this is going to be more visual for people to see because everybody is sharing this burden on their shoulders with their community. I don't think that you're not hearing a compassion from this group. We're just hearing what is the legality and what is the time frame.
I try to be as clear as possible. It's not legal currently, and faith communities can host right now. We change the law to be in accord with the state Supreme Court, so that can happen. That can happen tomorrow. Absolutely. There's nothing preventing that from happening. Even a nonprofit, there's a 6-month temporary use permit. They can also host tomorrow. That can happen. There's nothing preventing that from happening.
I think you've been very clear.
And if it's not clear, I'll say it again for the record, because someone is voting. that this is a very compassionate community. You guys are doing incredible stuff here. I read the West Seattle blog. You're getting great coverage, and people are doing incredible things, trying to help all over Seattle, here and elsewhere. We're having the same sorts of issues in Lake City, where there was a very contentious conversation there. A temporary winter shelter opened. So far, so good. The community seems to be stepping up and helping. We think that's a positive thing because there are people outside everywhere. You had your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to have my little take-home package here, and that what I hear you saying is there is no legal precedent for them, the Nickelsville, to be down on that land. Mayor McGinn's office is not planning to evict them, and we're going to have to just wait for this pathway to open up through this new RFI, whether that's going to be a legal place for them to stay forever. So essentially, nothing legally is happening. Mayor McGinn's office is saying, we're going to just let you stay. You flew in under the radar, and by the goodness of the Highland Park folks not flipping out, we're going to just let you stay because there's no better place for you to be. Is that what I hear you saying?
You also hear me saying that we changed the law to be in accord with the state so that churches could do their part.
Right, I keep hearing that. There's no churches here that are stepping up because these folks have been here since May, and we're having this conversation 5 months, 6 months later. There's no churches stepping up. Nobody's stepping up to foster these guys or to help these guys. Because essentially nobody sees them. They live in under the burn there, and so they're not real visible. So, I understand the homeless issue. I'm compassionate to the homeless issue, but I also just have to wonder, they flew in under the radar. Nobody really sees them, so they just get to stay because there's no better place for them to be. And you can't take care of everybody, so this is just what's going to happen. I mean, as a resident of Highland Park, if you look at me and tell me that this is just how it's going to be for a while, I will accept that, because that's what it sounds like.
Well, I'm not saying that exactly because I can't tell what the future's going to hold. I'm being straight up honest with you guys. I mean, they have contacts. They've moved 17 times. I'm sure they know lots of folks in the faith community that they could call up and say, hey, it's not getting so comfortable for us in this location. We'd love to come back.
So if they don't choose to move, and the mayor's office says, we're just going to let you stay, that's how it is.
So I get that you're voting for mass eviction.
Well, no, that's not true. You're not just
nobody will just say yes or no. It's very frustrating to us citizens that you guys are always like that.
If we can't get a better timeline, yes.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying is that am I to expect that these folks are just going to be my neighbors flying in under the radar, living illegally in city land, which I'm not allowed to do, and others aren't allowed to do either, just because it's a fine place to just let them be until we can figure it out. So
that's a really good point, and I think the message that you need to bring back is we totally accept these people being here. We want to help them, but you need to bring back a message saying that we feel burdened by this, and we need legislation that somehow possibly makes this legal to happen, but not permanently. She would be very happy if there's some legal precedent that said any place like Nickelsville will be able to come and stay here for 6 months, a year, or 2 years, doesn't matter. And there may be 3 or 4 of them around the city, and they move around the city to these legal areas that have proper services that can support these people. That's the message we need to tell you to bring back.
Not everyone in Highland Park thinks that. Not everyone in Highland Park thinks that.
And to their defense, that they know that. They hear that. I just have to reiterate this, and they will bring this message back. And so you have to give them the benefit of that, and give them the benefit.
I don't disagree with what you just said.
Right, I know you don't. I'm just saying this so people understand this here.
I also want to say for the record that to the Nickelsville folks, I don't think it's fair to say that we feel burdened by your presence. I just think that we feel like that
that homelessness, the problem of homelessness should be distributed throughout the city.
Yeah, burden is a harsh term.
It's the wrong word.
It's the wrong word, but it's, you know, it's the truth for a lot of people in the neighborhood. And some people don't feel it at all, you know, and some people would love for you to stay forever here. Some people would love for you to get up and move out tomorrow. But, you know, that's the whole spectrum.
And I would say any community.
Every
community you go to, you're going to bump into this because of the systemic problem that whereas a larger community is having, and that is people fear their property values are going down. Kisa?
I think one of the main issues is that this community had a similar issue when the jail proposal came in, so I think it's very sensitive for us to feel put upon or dumped on because we are not a community of lawyers and doctors.
No political clout.
So I think that's where the heat in this argument is coming from.
Well, I live in the Raider Valley, so I feel you.
Yeah, but so we just want to make sure that we're heard because we don't often feel heard. So I think that's where the frustration is coming from.
I appreciate emails and the letters, and we read all of them, absolutely. So you never feel burdened that you should not get in touch with us because you absolutely should.
Thank you.
So let's give them a